so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Bill Neilson, who is Associate Dean in the Honors College and Clinical Professor in the Honors Program. He is completing your 8th year here?
8th year, yep.
8th year. And after a career in medicine as a surgeon, administrator, and he came to Baylor and is literally probably mentored, I think, into the thousands of students at this point, maybe, over those 8 years, and the lives you've affected. And so as you are heading out and as you're sort of wrapping up your time at Baylor, I wanted to have a chance to have one last conversation with you to pass on really some of your own wisdom to somebody who won't get to have you in the future, which I think is a terrible shame. And I think probably many students here can attest to that because they've probably been with you in class. But for those who don't know you or haven't had a chance to have you in class, or those that will be watching this, would you just share a little bit about, I've given your titles, but what you've been doing here at Baylor, and then some about your career in medicine by way of sort of background and introduction?
Yeah, so I'll go chronologically. So I'm a Baylor graduate. After graduating from Baylor, I went to UT Southwestern. Was accepted, I guess, at both Harvard and Hopkins and a couple other places, and opted to go to Southwestern because it was free. And when I went to medical school, I liked the first 2 years. Okay, I hated the second 2 years. I thought I'd made a terrible mistake in being a physician, and then I rotated on surgery. And literally the day I started my surgery rotation and came home, my wife Carol said to me, "I guess you're going to be a surgeon." And I said, "What? Why would you possibly say that? I'm not going to be a surgeon. I don't have the personality of most surgeons," and so on. And she said, "Well, you haven't smiled for months." And in fact, I became a surgeon and did my surgery residency at Parkland, which at the time was the best surgery program in the country, and it's still probably top 10. And then when I finished, I did liver transplants. I actually started doing organ procurement during the 5th year of my residency. So you're on call every 3rd night at Parkland or the VA, and then I would fly around and harvest livers, and I was the guy with the igloo ice chest getting on the Learjet and flying home. And I went 2 full months without ever seeing my children awake, and Carol suggested that she simply said, "Do you really want to do this?" Which meant, have you lost your mind? And so I left the medical school, went to private practice, ultimately went to Amarillo, was the Texas Tech surgery faculty. My partners and I were the Texas Tech surgery faculty. And then became a chief medical officer at a hospital in Amarillo, went back to school and got my master's degree in healthcare management. And then through a bizarre series of events in 2011, found out about the job at Baylor and applied for it and came here in 2012. And so since I've been here, I was basically hired to work with pre-med students. So I've taught a class, I didn't make this name up, called Medicine, Meaning in the Physician-Patient Relationship. I've taught a class on the healthcare system. I've taught immunology. I've taught pathophysiology, and I've taught human anatomy. And probably directed somewhere between 25 and 30 undergraduate theses. And spent untold hours talking to pre-med students, both talking to them about going to medical school or talking to them about not going to medical school. Also the sponsor of Christian Pre-Health Fellowship, along with you and Bill Hoy. And then for reasons that are still obscure to me, I became Associate Dean of the Honors College. I've been on the Faculty Senate for 6 years, and I was on the Presidential Search Committee that hired Linda Livingston. So I've been fairly busy.
Great, thanks. You have been, and you've meant and done a lot to Baylor. Let me follow up. So going back to your sort of when you started at the beginning of your story, why medicine? And did you ever imagine doing anything else when you were in college?
Yeah. I've got a terrible answer for this question. Um, so I was a first generation college student. My dad was in the construction industry, got his education in the Corps of Engineers, and he wanted me to be an engineer. He wanted me to go to MIT, and so I had always thought, well, I'll be an engineer. And when I was a junior in high school, I got contact lenses, and I thought that's kind of cool. And when I was a senior in high school, I worked in the construction business, got a couple of pretty significant injuries, and so I got to interact with the healthcare system. And I thought, well, I think I'll be a doctor, and I gave it about that much thought. And so when I got to medical school, or got to Baylor, I had decided I was going to be a doctor, so that's what I pursued. And I didn't even know what majors were. I didn't have a real understanding of all that, and became a chemistry major because the guy sitting beside me, also an incoming freshman. Well, so what happened is I told him, well, my major will be pre-med, and they said, well, that's not a major. And I said, well, tell me some majors. And so they gave me a list, and the guy beside me, I said, well, what's the hardest one? And the guy beside me said, chemistry. And I said, well, I'm a chemistry major. And that's about as much thought as I gave that. So I'm very reflective, as you can tell.
This is definitely a well thought out path. I can see. You've now been teaching pre-med students at Baylor since 2012. You've had a hand in training many, as you talked about, both in class, through conversations, both formal and informal. As you think back on all those students, what are 2 or 3 qualities or characteristics you find in the students who seem to be doing the best in their preparation for med school? What sort of qualities or character do they seem to have that you would point to?
Yes, that's a great question. I've actually reflected on this a lot since you told me that. I never reflect. So Dr. Sanker tells me I'm simple, and he's maybe correct. So of course, the things that make you a good pre-med student are the same things that make you a good medical student, and the same things that make you a good physician. And so part of those are perseverance. You have to decide that you're going to persevere in this incredibly challenging curriculum, and forego doing a lot of things that your friends might be doing. And so you don't have maybe the same college experience as some of your friends do. You have to have kind of a laser-like focus, and you have to want to be excellent. And indeed, if you were to ask me what I think makes a person a really good doctor, so you'll probably ask me that in a minute, I think excellence is part of that. And then the last thing is you have to have integrity. You have to, in a sense, be a virtuous person, but encompass a number of virtues. So you have to be able to do self-effacement. You have to say, I'm not going to do the things I want to do because I'm seeking this other goal or seeking the good of other people. And you have to have that sort of recognition early on to be able to persevere through the challenges, because it's not easy, but it's fun. You know, I mean, I enjoyed all my undergraduate classes, but it's not the same as a lot of other majors, which don't require, the lab time and don't require the same GPA. So there's this incredible stress. So you've got to be resilient as well. You have to be able to be honest with yourself about whether or not this is the right choice. That'd be the short answer to that, I guess. Just
good. So let's shift that question just a little bit. What do you want students? So we have a number on here, a number who are listening, and I know many of them who are on here are aspiring to medical school, aspiring to be physicians. What do you want them to do or consider during their years as undergraduate students to prepare them to be good physicians, good administrators, PAs, nurses, PTs, OTs? And I mean, and also with that question, of course, when I'm asking, what do you think you want them to consider or do? What are they doing in this time during undergrad? There's also at least some idea of what a good physician looks like ultimately. You've talked to some of those things already.
Yeah. And so this is a great question. How do you prepare yourself for a life of practicing medicine? So key point of that is a big part of practicing medicine is serving other people. And and so I mentioned self-effacement a moment ago. That is it just doesn't happen. One day you don't decide, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start serving other people. It's almost like a learned trait. You have to do it and do it and do it. I'm not a warm fuzzy person. I mean, I think I'm kind of kind and thoughtful, but I'm not like so many people want to run up and hug, right? And 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 I had to learn how to kind of subjugate my own desires to serve other people. And it might have been, I mean, even when I was in college, and taking organic lab, I might have been spending time helping somebody else figure out how to do their organic lab as opposed to doing my own organic lab. You have to learn how to do those things. And at the same time, that also has a component of leadership. If you're practicing medicine, you're a leader, you're in leadership positions, whether you want to be or not. People look up to you since you're in medicine. You have to lead a team to help take care of every patient. And so the developing leadership skills, and I think the most important of those is humility, is critical. So those two things go together, right? Leadership and service. Another thing that I think undergrads really need is they need to be able to take their own desires. Well, they need to be able to put themselves in other people's positions. And so to do that, you have to have life experiences that are kind of outside of your comfort zone. And for me, I worked in the construction industry all through college, so I interacted with people that were maybe semi-criminal in their lifestyles. I worked in New Orleans on the ship channel. I was the only non-African American employee of the factory where I worked. We built barges for offshore oil well drilling, and I was also the only person who had not been a felon and had been an inmate in the state prison of Angola, which is the high security prison in Louisiana. And I washed dishes at Western Sizzling, which is the equivalent of Golden Corral, and I met all kinds of interesting people. And you had to learn how to interact with those people. And then I worked drawing blood at Hillcrest. I got to kind of see what the healthcare system was like from the provider side, not the receiver side, if you will. So I think all those things were really helpful to me in college. I was involved in undergraduate research that studied the temperature changes on the surface of an electrode while electroplating, and that is about as exciting as it sounds, and is, just so you know, it gets warmer. But I think everybody, regardless if you're a nurse or a physician or a healthcare administrator or a physical therapist, all those traits are kind of critical. And those life experiences are critical. So, go ahead.
Okay, I was just say, well, it's interesting as you're talking. I'm reminded of a line. I'm going off script on you here. I'm reminded of a line from Abraham Nussbaum's book, The Finest Traditions of My Calling, where he says something to the effect of what happens at some point in medical school is as what got students really into college, what gets them in medical school is suddenly not what gets them into residency. Suddenly in residency, they're starting to look for people who actually have good character. And some of the things that you're talking about here, has that been what you found? Do you think that's an accurate statement? I mean, he obviously means you still have to have, the knowledge and skills and all, but he says something that something shifts when they start actually looking for people who are going to be on teams of doctors and actually going into training in hospitals?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So medical school, it's a little different now. All they cared about before was what's your GPA and what's your MCAT score. And now they're looking a little bit more holistically, so that's a good thing. But when you apply for residency, they want to know kind of who you are and can you function appropriately under the right circumstances. So your letters, for example, if you apply in a surgery residency, your letters are from, shockingly, your surgery attendings. And if they don't think you will function well as a surgery resident, you might not get a surgery residency program. And then so medical school sort of teaches you, it sort of tries to force you into this mold of what doctors are supposed to be like, at least what this perception of what doctors are supposed to be like. So you learn about to be dispassionate, and you learn how to interview a patient and how to direct a conversation and not spend 30 minutes listening to them wax eloquent about their puppy or something. But when you're a resident, you actually have to do the things that doctors do. You have to make decisions. You have to interact with people in times of crisis, and you do have to have a team and be a good team member or team leader, depending on where you are. And so I think that's right. I think there's a second tiered step that takes place when you're in a residency. It's vastly different than medical school. So I really didn't like medical school very much. I loved being a surgery resident. I knew what my responsibilities were. It was very structured. When I'm an intern, this is what I'm responsible for. I'm a second year, I'm responsible for this. I knew, kind of had an understanding of my role, and it was graduated. So you took progressively greater amounts of responsibility. When I was done, I was ready to walk out and take care of patients.
Good. What do you think are some of the challenges in medicine that students studying at Baylor now are going to face when they're practicing? What do you see coming?
Well, so I think it's going to be very different. And let me just digress for a second to talk about some of the traits you may need to be able to succeed in that. And one of them is courage. A practicing physician who doesn't have courage might avoid taking care of a patient with coronavirus. If you look at what we're seeing right now, all over the planet, over 100 Italian physicians have died. I think we're at 25 or so American healthcare providers. I don't know how many of those are physicians who have died so far. There's a component of courage to place yourself in harm's way. There's also a component of courage to hold yourself accountable and your peers accountable to be excellent at what they do. And so if your partner, for example, is not behaving appropriately, you've got to go have the courage to tell your partner, you can't act like this. It's hard. It's a different kind of courage maybe, but still courage. And then integrity becomes even more important, because now you've got to be able to tell yourself the truth. So some of the worst doctors I interacted with were physicians who when they had a complication would pretend like it hadn't happened, and then it harmed the patient because they weren't honest. You have to be honest all the time. In fact, I used to tell my medical students and residents, you can tell me you don't know, just don't make an answer up. Because if I'm asking you about the patient, what's their potassium, and if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. Don't make up a number and tell me, because then I will act on that information as though it's true and could potentially harm someone. And that's always the case in the entire time that you're practicing medicine. So when you kind of think about what's happening now, I think we've been at a financial tipping point in healthcare for some time. I think coronavirus will tip us the rest of the way over the edge. The interesting thing about it is what may need to be tipped is the U.S. public health system, not the U.S. acute care or medical care system. But I think you never waste a good crisis, and so we'll see drastic changes in how healthcare is delivered. One of my friends sent me an article today that suggested 40% of currently practicing family practitioners will basically be leaving practice by the end of June because they're going broke, because they're not seeing patients, because patients don't come to their office, because they're afraid to, and they may not be doing telemedicine, or they may not be reimbursed for telemedicine, so they can't pay the bills. And if they're old enough, they're going, I'm just going to drop out of this. Well, that'll create a sea change in terms of how healthcare is delivered, and suddenly non-physician providers, PAs, nurse practitioners will fill that role. So I think there's going to be a substantive change in how and who delivers medicine and how it's delivered. I think telemedicine is going to be huge. I think we're also going to see that this will push people into employment or bigger partnership models in order to be able to deal with this sort of economic downturn. I mean, my former partners are all sitting at home and generating zero income now for about 6 weeks. And now you can do that for a while, but pretty soon you have to start laying off the people that answer the phone, and the people that work with insurance, and the people that are, your nurses. I mean, all those people are getting paid but not working, and the physicians are not getting paid and not working. So it's that I think will change. And I also think, so I think we'll see corporatization and more government control of medicine. And I think the financial equations will change. So doctors, have since probably the 1960s, have been at the top of the professional ladder in terms of compensation on average. The doctors are by no means the most highly compensated professionals, but if you average all doctors and all lawyers and so on, doctors probably come out ahead. And I think those numbers will drop, and I think that's okay. Doctors have a lot of discretionary income, and you just will do less discretionary things. And the implication of that is that you shouldn't practice medicine if you're doing it to make money, because if you're doing it exclusively to make money, there's better ways to do that. That answer your question?
That's good. Yeah, that's a great answer. It's a very interesting time. That was the same conversation I had today with Tyler Couch, who's a fourth year medical student, and looking for him ahead from the point of view. He's looking the beginning of his career, first looking back and seeing some of those things and recognizing some of those same challenges. I'm going to shift gears. What's the most important? So this is where the last lecture part comes in. What's the most important advice or word of wisdom you've received, and what has it meant? Have you applied it in your life?
So, there's a lot of ways I could go with this. So when it comes to medicine, most of the people that really deeply impacted me and were mentors to me didn't talk as much as they acted in certain ways. And so what was apparent is, I will walk out of my kid's birthday party to go take care of the patient in the emergency room with a ruptured spleen. Well, that seems like an obviously correct thing to do. That's great the first time you do it. And then on the second birthday party, when you do that, that starts to become a little harder. And the ability, again, to persevere. Again, perseverance, self-effacement, those two things we talked about, are become something that you've learned from watching somebody else do it and then starting to practice it yourself. And so I had the gift of working with a number of people that modeled those particular virtues, and I watched them, and I tried to emulate their behavior. And then I think other people start to emulate my behavior because of, and there's the expectation of excellence. So one of my former partners told me, he said, you will know everything there is to know about surgery for about 5 years from the time you finish your residency. And then if you haven't tried to keep up during that 5-year period, you're going to be behind and you can never catch up. And one of the things that I think people don't appreciate when they embark on a career in medicine is it is that learning new things never stops. And if you ever stop, you become, in a sense, a little dangerous. There's actually data to show that doctors who just, if you had a heart attack and you see a doctor who just finished their fellowship in cardiology, your mortality is lower than if you see somebody that's 50 years old. Whereas the person who's 50 ought to have 20 years of experience, ought to be able to recognize patterns and so on better. But because the average person doesn't keep up very well, they're not practicing state-of-the-art medicine. And so even if you're inexperienced and don't have, you know, the life lessons about how to take care of somebody, you might not do as good a job. And so this ability to force yourself, again, perseverance comes up. The ability to force yourself to keep learning is a critical component. The other thing is, my dad, you know, as I mentioned before, or maybe I didn't, was a high school dropout, and he was a source of lots of interesting information. And one of the things he would always say is, you know, if something's really important, it's worth fighting about. And then he would say, and the other thing you need to know is, anytime you get in a fight, whether you're right or wrong, you're going to get hurt. So, you know, physicians don't have physical confrontations, but we do have emotional confrontations and professional confrontations. And the wisdom comes from knowing which things are simply unacceptable behaviors, and then doing your best to stand up for what you perceive to be right. The people in my office used to just laugh because they would say, well, what, you know, should I do X, Y, or Z? I said, well, just do what's right and it'll be fine. But they got so sick of me saying, well, just do the right thing and it's going to work out. But in fact, doing the right thing sometimes makes it really hard for you, right? And so you wind up suffering for doing the right thing. It might be you do, instead of doing 6 cases today, you do 12 because somebody's grandmother flew into, I mean, you know, you never know what the issue is. But again, that self-effacement issue comes up. And then the last sort of practical thing was, one of my attendings at Parkland told me, never operate on somebody until you've met their family. And I said, well, I'm not going to operate on their family. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Because if you have a relationship with the family and you go operate on the patient and you come back out to talk to the family, if you already know them, even if it's just a minimal amount of time, you will develop a level of credibility when you talk to them to help them understand how to navigate what might be bad news. And so I made that an absolute rule. I would not operate on anybody until I talk to the family. And the part of that's just being kind, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, I guess.
Any life lesson? I know you talked about your dad giving life lessons. What else have you learned outside of medicine?
You know, so I've had some interesting life experiences, as you might imagine. But you know, a number of years ago, we had a pretty significant family event that was very difficult, and to kind of navigate through that, we needed our friends to support us, needed to be transparent, and what we learned from that is, when you make yourself vulnerable to other people will come to you to get help. If they think your world is perfect, and you know, I can make a case that my life has been pretty perfect. You know, I got a great family, and you know, but we all deal with difficult things, and if we try to hide them, people won't come to you when they need something. And so if you want to be somebody that is able to be an encourager to other people or help them when their life is not going the way it should go, then if you haven't appeared mortal, it doesn't work. And the other thing is, as you know, and I guess Rich knows, I had a pretty substantial health issue that appeared a few years ago. And so, you know, I have a degenerative neuromuscular condition. I would operate, I started dropping instruments and fell down a few times. And you know, ultimately went to the neurologist, and then I went to see another neurologist, and then had a bunch of tests done, and the final thinking was, well, it's a cervical disc, and so I had my spine operated on, and then I didn't get better, and then went back to the neurologist and went to see people. I got a neurologist in Kansas, and a neurologist at Vanderbilt, and a neurologist at BCM in Houston, and ultimately they told me I had a motor neuron disease, which is a variant of ALS, and so. And initially told me they thought I would live about 2 years. And so obviously I'm still alive. And so one of the weird things about that is you have to kind of recalibrate your life when you think you're not going to live very long. So you do the things that you think are important. So, one of the things I did is I loved my work. I loved my family. So I thought I'll keep working. And I had the great gift of becoming chief medical officer of the hospital system where I worked. The guy that had been in that role was retired, and I wound up having a total of 4 different C-spine operations, and I was trying to rehab, and I was trying to get back to the operating room. This is before I finally got this diagnosis that meant that I wouldn't be able to do it. And so I started working as chief medical officer, and so then I thought, well, if I'm going to do the same thing about this, I need to get an education about this. So I went back to school and started working on my master's. And then when they told me they didn't think I was going to live very much longer, I thought, well, that's a waste of time. I'm not going to do that. But I kept working, and then I didn't die. I kind of kept waiting around to die, and I didn't die. And so I thought, well, I'll go back to school. So I went back to school and finished my master's, and got involved in Texas Hospital Association and Healthcare Coalition of Texas, and I was having a great career doing that. And then I got to where I was having more and more trouble doing my job. And my neurologist and internist came to me and said, you've got to quit this. And about that time, Baylor, I ended up contacting Baylor. So the really interesting lesson from all that is I thought I was pretty indispensable. I thought I was pretty good at what I did. And, I was a critical part of the community. And after I'd probably not been operating for about 6 months, I ran into one of my cardiology colleagues, and he said, where you been? I said, well, I'm being the chief medical officer. And he's like, well, huh, okay. And he kind of kept walking. Well, the guy, I hadn't operated for 6 months and nobody noticed, like nobody died. I figured people would be dying on the streets. Not going to be clutching these people out of the jaws of death. And it was really kind of humbling, right? Because I thought I was sort of important, and maybe I'm not important at all as this circumstance goes. So, and then I learned, again, this teamwork part. I saw medicine from a totally different perspective and realized how incredibly complex it is, and how doctors really don't like administrators, but administrators are really trying to help. And the other thing, Jason, is I had to have the courage to hold people accountable. And so there's a guy, for example, that, I had a series of events happen. So had one guy that worked for me. He was a physician and had an affair and got kicked out of his house by his wife. And so he came to my office sort of in tears going, what am I going to do? And I said, well, I guess you need to move in with us. And so he moved in with us. Well, part of the reason he was willing to do that was because he knew I cared about him, right? I didn't care about the appearances of having, I just didn't care about it. I just cared about him. And so he went up living with us for about 6 months, which was not what I'd intended. And his parents came to, it was crazy. And I had a guy that was a terribly dangerous physician, and I basically led the process that resulted in him losing his privileges to practice medicine. Ultimately went to the Texas Medical Board and testified against him so he would lose his license. But at the same time, I would take him to lunch and try to. So he's totally confused by this, right? Because like on the one hand, he thinks like I hate him, and on the other hand, I'm trying to spend time with him and encourage him in this very difficult circumstance. So I I don't know if that answers your question. I probably got off track. Sorry.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Let me pause here and say, remind you again, if those of you watching have some questions, go ahead and send me a chat, and I will add those. I've got a couple more, but if you have some you want to get in, please do that. You can private message me here on the chat thing. We talked. You said to me, I think at one point we've talked about burnout among American physicians, and it's significant, obviously.
Sure.
How did you ever get to a point of burnout? If
No,
not,
but
why do you think? And then what would you think about what's causing this, and what might be how might people avoid it?
That's a great question. So the first part, I don't think I ever got burned out. I mean, there were times I'd be tired, right? I mean, sometimes I'd be on call by myself, while my partner's out of town for like 10 days in a row. And you get sleep deprived, and then you just can't hardly bear to. You just want to. All you really want to do is go to sleep, and but I always liked operating. I mean, it is so much fun to do surgery. I didn't like I didn't like paperwork. But I loved doing surgery, and it was almost kind of relaxing for me because I knew what to do. I knew that I'd been trained as well as anybody on the planet, and I knew that if I couldn't figure out what to do for somebody, that I could call one of my partners, and between the two of us, we were as good as anybody. And so there's a confidence that you have from really working hard. And then I because I had great partners, I had people to talk to, and because I'm happily married, I had a wife to talk to. And so, as opposed to, and as you know me well enough to know, I see the humor in everything. And so I would, it'd be in some terrible circumstance, but I could always see the kind of the comedic side of people's behavior and stuff. And so, and on Sundays, if I was on call, and so if I was on call, you'd be up all night Friday night, all night Saturday night, and then you'd be up Sunday all day. And then generally, for some reason, Sunday afternoons, things kind of slowed down. And I would always go over to one of my partner's houses and relate to him all the bizarre things that would happen in that previous 60 or 70 hours. And we would just laugh. And I think that ability to talk to people all the time sort of helped me not get burned out. And I think I was doing, so I think we're probably all designed to do a number of different things. I don't think that it's like there's not just one person you can marry. I think there's not just one job you can do. I mean, I'm a big example of that, right? I was an iron worker, and I've been a carpenter, and I practiced medicine. I've been a hospital administrator, and now I'm kind of a pseudo professor. And so and have loved every one of those things. So calling, so I think if you feel called to do medicine, what happens is your personality, your personal traits, I don't mean your personality or you're funny or that sort of, I mean your basic personal attributes, if they fit well with the rigors of a career in medicine, then maybe you want to do that, and maybe you're called to do that. And I think if those things fit together well, I think you probably don't burn out very much. And you got to be curious, right? I mean, you got to just keep wanting to learn. But that's part of one of the required traits.
Right. So we've had a number of good questions come in. So I'm going to kind of take these, not quite the order they came, but I'm going to ask you, if you were to change something about the way pre-med students are educated at Baylor or in general, what would you change?
Well, I'm not sure I would change. Well, I might change the mindset that you have to be a science major, because I think you have to understand science, you have to like science, you have to excel in science, but you can major in anything. Um, and so, and there's only one opportunity in your life to pursue some discipline that you're passionate about. So if you love American history, you'll never have a chance to learn American history like you would in college when you're learning it from somebody who's an expert in American history. And so I would encourage people to pursue their sort of intellectual passion with this caveat that you have to excel in the sciences. I guess the other thing is I would want our students to reflect more deeply about some of the implications of a career in medicine. So that you're constantly faced with ethical issues. I mean, literally, like every day you're faced with ethical issues, even if they're just you with yourself. You know, should I do this procedure for this person? If I do this procedure, I get paid this much. If I do this procedure, I get paid that much. Or, there's always this should I send this person to this doctor? Will the personality gel with them? Or should I send this other person who sends me more patients? You have to always do the right thing. Again, always do what's right? And so, but to do that, you have to thought about what's right. And so, I don't view medicine as a business. At its very heart, it's a relationship. It's fundamentally, to quote somebody, it's a moral enterprise, and I kind of always sensed that, but I never really was taught that. I just observed people behaving in that fashion. So if you're an undergrad, you can take, this is the only time you will have time to reflect on these sorts of issues and think about the moral implications of what you're doing. Think about, what it means to meet needs of people who are scared and we're kind of a profoundly medically illiterate society. And so people, when they go to the doctor, it's like entering some black box and something terrible happens and then you come out the other end. I mean, they don't have a clue what's going on. And so you've got to think about kind of the human condition, if you will, and how vulnerable all of us are and how transient our lives are. And you got to determine if you're resilient enough to do this job, because it has demands that other jobs don't have.
So this question might go a little bit hand in glove with that one, because a lot of that reflection happens because you read and engage things in texts and in books or whatever, and ask, do you have book recommendations on becoming a good physician or a person or in general that you would say, I think students going into medicine or think about becoming physicians or healthcare workers, I think they should read this?
Yeah. Well, so one of my favorite books, which I wish I'd read 20 years ago or 30 years ago, is Edmund Pellegrino's Virtues in Medical Practice. And he wrote a shorter version of it, The Christian Virtues in Medical Practice. When I read that book, I kept thinking, well, this explains, this is someone who's actually articulated a frustration that I've encountered in practicing medicine, and I wished I'd had literally the vocabulary to explain it properly. There's a book I really like that I get students to read called The Social Transformation of American Medicine, which will give students a sense of how we got here. It's a little hard to understand the United States healthcare system without understanding its origin and the forces that have shaped it. And when you're entering into that system, it's kind of nice to know about it. You're going to probably laugh at me. I never read Aristotle till I got here. I read Nicomachean Ethics, and that was a great book. I mean, it's another way to help you start to think about virtue and ethics and and what you realize when you've been practicing medicine for a long time is what you're trying to do is hang out with virtuous doctors. So as you know, I'm a deeply devout Christian, but I would rather work with an atheist who was virtuous than a Christian who had not given that much thought. And one of my favorite partners was kind of an evangelical atheist, and we and he's one of my closest friends, and so there's anyway, I guess that's enough books to read. I read a book or two a week, every week, and so and I have done that for as long as I can remember. And I'm never without reading a book. And some of them are fiction books. I decided to read the classics probably about 25 years ago. I started reading a classical, Dostoevsky and then had a friend that I would read books with, and we'd talk about it every week. And I think that makes you a better doctor too, because all those books make you understand people better, and you understand cultures better. I've been in Belarus on medical mission work and read War and Peace before I went to Belarus, which I probably could have found something better to read. But it was a whip, and you need an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of all the characters. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. I don't think I'd put War and Peace on, but others, yes. Yes, I would. Which classes? I'm going to stay with this theme for a second, and we'll jump. There are a couple others here that I think take us a different direction, but are good questions. Which class was your favorite to teach here at Baylor, and what was one of your favorite lectures you ever gave?
Oh, so you have to understand, so I live in kind of a state of mild controlled euphoria, and so I've loved every class that I've taught, and I've really liked everything that I've talked about in class. I think maybe my favorite lecture is a lecture I give in my healthcare class about social justice and market justice, and I have a couple of clips from Star Wars that are not Star Wars, Star Trek, even dating myself, that are really pretty humorous, that kind of fit the theme of that. And I make the students line up across the room from one side to the other and continue them about where they feel like they fit in that world. But I got to tell you, when I taught path, I get so excited about all the it's just some of the really intricate and elaborate and just amazing mechanisms that our bodies, for whatever reason, actually work. And then when the wheels come off, how that unhinges some metabolic path. I mean, it's just the coolest thing ever. So I'm not sure I picked one for you, but I'm not sure there's any one thing that I cared about more than any other.
Okay. Okay. So different direction on this question. Wondering what you think about how the current COVID virus will affect rural medicine.
Oh,
rural communities, particularly which is about physicians.
Yeah, so the big issue is there's not going to be access to healthcare very effectively. So rural America, it's not this idyllic place that we think of with nice red barns going over creeks. It's by and large poor. There are not acceptable healthcare, certainly not quality healthcare that's uniformly available. And so I think more and more of it will be delivered by non-physician practitioners. The COVID virus is really interesting because you can't get tested, right? If there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to get tested. And so because there's a big issue about if you've been reading about coronavirus, that the effect is disproportionate on the African American population. It's not that African Americans are more susceptible to disease. It's African Americans are more likely to be poor. So it's really disproportionately affecting people who have the diseases of poverty. So their obesity and diabetes and poorly controlled hypertension and poorly controlled diabetes because they can't afford their medicines, a whole series of things and all those things are bad in rural communities. I used to get referrals from the panhandle of Oklahoma. It's about a 3-hour drive for the patients to get there. And whenever they would come, they would be the sickest people they ever cared for because they had no access to quality health care. And so, if they had something like appendicitis, which is fairly straightforward to take care of, they also had uncontrolled diabetes and untreated hypertension. And to be able to get them through a procedure was just a nightmare because their overall health was so bad. And I think that's what we're facing in rural America. It's truly like two different countries. It's even worse than living in the inner city in terms of healthcare.
So I had a student ask today in class from rural Texas saying it's been really hard because it sort of perhaps what goes parallel with this is many of the people around her don't believe in the dangers of the virus.
Mm-hmm.
They're continuing to go out, continuing to gather, and so going to face sort of the added spread of the disease when it arrives.
Yeah, well, so there's a valid distrust of medicine amongst certain demographic groups in the United States, and if you don't understand science, so people like to think that science will just give you this black and white answer, but science tends to be incremental in knowledge, and sometimes things look like this answer is going to be A, but when you get a little more information, it's actually B. I can't tell you how many times we've changed the rules about how you treat breast cancer since I went to medical school. I mean, and sometimes they're diametrically opposed to what you were supposed to do before. But it's because as we've gotten more sophisticated about doing studies, we can get more and more detailed information, and then the decision trees change. And so with coronavirus, we don't know enough to speak very intelligently. We don't even know what percent of the population has been affected. I mean, it might be 3 to 5%, it might be 20%. If it's 20%, it's a totally different deal than if it's 3 to 5%, right? I mean, so so this distrust of science that is manifest during this crisis is a problem.
What are some of your perhaps main recommendations, best practices working with those who go alongside the physician, whether it's the physician assistant, nurses, nurse practitioners? What's your experience been working with those professions, and how's that gone?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways to go with this. So you have to work with people that you trust, and you have to put the time into place to train them properly. And of course, the problem is once you get them properly trained, then they're now marketable and they can go get a different job somewhere else, then you have to train somebody else. So the people that worked for me in my office, we hired nurses from the hospital that we trusted implicitly, and then trained them to do things the way we wanted to do. And by and large, the key thing is call me if you're not sure. And in the operating room, you're working with people typically are high school graduates who have not gone to college. They're the scrub techs who hand you instruments, but they are a critical component of how surgery goes. And so you have to train those people, but you also have to treat them as you have to. So this is where humility is a key. If you try to make yourself seem more important than they are because you have a medical degree as opposed to part of a team with them, they will not necessarily appreciate you very much. And so if you've been practicing humility since you were in college or since at some point, if you start trying to treat other people as maybe more important than you yourself are, then it alters this whole dynamic of how you work together.
This is the last question I think I've gotten, and so I'm going to ask it, and I think this is one that even the asker would say you can say no, but I think it's a hopeful and aspiring question here, which is you have mentioned before that your wife was engaged before you met her. Your students have long asked you for the story, but you refrained from telling us. So they said, seeing that this is your last lecture, would you finally be willing to tell the story?
I don't know if Carol's in here. She's listening carefully.
Without opening yourself to horrible bodily harm.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through this carefully. So bottom line is, so I was actually dating a girl, and that I met Carol. I was I was running for student body president, and they told me that I needed a liberal, and Carol was a liberal. She'd voted for McGovern, who was like the most liberal Democratic candidate in history, and there were only two people in her precinct in Louisiana that voted for him, and she knew the other one. And so I didn't know who she was, and I set up a meeting with her in the Barfield drawing room and talked to her for about an hour, and walked out of the meeting and said, I'm going to marry her. The problem was I was dating somebody else, so I had to figure out how to judiciously work my way out of that relationship. And then Carol lives in Shreveport, and I was working in New Orleans on the ship channel, and so I wrote letters back and forth, and actually went to Shreveport and picked her up once and brought her to Waco. If you look at a map, that is not a direct route. And I had to give a speech to freshman orientation, and then we went canoeing in the Guadalupe River and went to a rodeo of all things, and then took her home. And I thought, this is great, I'm going to marry her. And I think, she's like falling in love with me, but who wouldn't, right? And so I got back to school, and actually, I was Sunday night. I went to Sunday night church at Columbus Avenue. This famous singer named Cynthia Clausen sang, and then I went over to Carol's apartment because I knew she was now here from Shreveport, and thinking, she's going to like proclaim her undying love for me, and we'll live happily ever after. And she told me that she was engaged, and I was like, that is not how I thought this evening would go. But I'm quick. So I said, well, I'm student body president. I have to go to all these events. And so I can't find someone to go out with me sometimes. So, would you go with me if I can't find a date? She's like, well, yeah, that'd probably be okay. So I just continued to date her, even though she didn't know we were dating. And then we got to November, and her fiance had a substantive indiscretion. And so she called me and said, I need to talk. So I took her over to St. Albans Episcopal Church, which used to be open all night. The sanctuary was. And so we drove to St. Albans, and we sat in the sanctuary, and she told me, this story. And she said, what do you think I should do? And I was like, get rid of him and take me. But I was appropriately sympathetic, and suggested that maybe they not date anymore, and that she not be engaged to him. And so she allowed us out. That was a reasonable plan. And then I thought, well, I sure don't want to get caught on a rebound here, so I'm going to be really careful about this relationship. And so Bailey went to the Cotton Bowl that year, and she actually called me and asked me to take her to meet her date to the Cotton Bowl, which was one of the low points of that relationship. And so then, I went home for the holidays and then came back, and so I started going and hanging out with her. And so I thought, it's been a couple of months, probably safe to start dating her. So I would take her out like on Saturday nights, but I had this other girl I was friends with, and I would take her out on Friday nights, but I wouldn't have any romantic interest in her at all. Well, it turns out that the other girl liked this guy. We'll call him Mr. X. She liked this guy, Mr. X, and she was going out with him on Saturday nights, and then Carol was going out with this guy same guy on Friday night. So there's two guys and two girls who were dating the opposite one on Friday and Saturday nights, and neither one of us knew anything about this. And one of my roommates said, isn't that kind of awkward? I was like, what? And he's like, well, that's just terrible. And so I went to Carol. I said, this is ridiculous. You should just date me. And she said, yeah, that's probably right. And so she dated me for a couple months, and then we were on a date one time, and she said, I don't really like you that much. We probably shouldn't date. I was like, well, okay. And so then like a week or two after that, she decided that had been a mistake and that she thought we should date. And so we started going out again. and she took me to her sorority formal, which was in Dallas, and I had a great time. And then we got in the car to come home to Waco, and we got in the car. Literally, she said, I don't want to date you. I don't even think I like you that much. And so then we had a nice drive back to Waco. And so I thought, well, that's not going well. So then she's a year older than me, so she was going to graduate. And I took her to lunch, like during the graduation. And then I thought, okay, that's done. I've got to move on with my life. And so, but I still thought that I was supposed to going to marry her. And so my roommates just gave me unmitigated grief about this. And I'm now, some other friends that are girls. And then one night I came home, and I'd been out playing basketball or something with my roommates. And for some reason they were gone. And I got this overwhelming sense of fear and concern for Carol. So I don't generally respond to this sort of thing, but I thought, this is just weird. And so I picked up the phone and called her house and talked to her dad, and she was out on a date with her former fiance, who was a really bad person. And so I told her dad, I don't care what time it is, you have her call me. So at 2 a.m, she called me. And so I just told her like she was just like an absolute idiot for going out with this guy. And I'm abbreviating all this so Carol won't kill me later. And and I hung up the phone, and I thought, well, that didn't go well. And so I thought, well, I'm never going to hear from her again. And about 2 weeks after that, she calls me and says, I'm going to be in Waco. Can I come by and visit? And so she came over to my apartment, and we visited. And then ultimately it was apparent that she wanted to start dating again. And so I told her, look, this has been sort of a rodeo for me. And so you've like dumped on me 3 different times. And so if I'm going to go out with you, it's going to be to assess whether or not we're going to get married or not, which means if you got any other relationships, you need to end them, and we're going to date each other until we figure this out. So she said, okay. And then we lived happily ever after. Now, I will say at my rehearsal dinner, one of my best friends gave me a note, which I still have, which said, it's not over yet. She hadn't said I do. She can still bail on you at the last moment. So
I don't know how the rest of the video is going to play for the people who watch this in the future, but I am pretty sure that part is going to have a lot of references when they have to write their honors papers for credit for this. So, I really wish we had you and Carol at our relationship formation series earlier in the year. Last question, because I want to be mindful of time, but one last question is, what last word do you have that you would want to leave with Baylor students? Any final word you want to give them?
Yeah, so part of our, I thought, I could think of 1,000 things I could say. But part of our calling, those of us who are Christians, is to bring order out of chaos. And we're in the midst of chaos right now with coronavirus. People are afraid. People are distanced from their friends. It's a unique time, but it is not as bad as some other times, right? I mean, people are not, as I was talking to Carol about this. I mean, when I was growing up, we had JFK assassinated, the Cuban Missile Crisis, expecting global thermonuclear war at any given moment. Then RFK gets killed and Martin Luther King gets killed. And when I lived in North Carolina, my dad hired African Americans coming out of the Corps and Engineers to be in management positions, and the Ku Klux Klan had death threats from the Ku Klux Klan, and kept a loaded shotgun at my front door for probably 6 months. I mean, this is not like that, right? I mean, there are many worse things than getting sick, and there are many worse things than getting sick and dying. So I guess, so I was thinking about, I've been reading the book of Mark, and Jesus is in the boat in the storm with the disciples, and they're terrified, and wake him up. And his comment is, "Why are you so afraid?" And that's what I would say. Now, why are we all so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And for those of us who are Christians, we do have faith, and we should be bringing order out of chaos, and we shouldn't be afraid. Now maybe we're going to be afraid, but we have reasons not to be. And part of this is simply, part of it is again, it's like it's like teaching yourself to do the right thing. Part of it is educating yourself when you do get afraid to think, well, who am I and who is in charge here? And so if you're afraid you're going to take a test, or you're afraid that you won't get to medical school, or you're afraid of coronavirus, whatever it is, the key thing about that is to know that you're in God's hands. And, Psalm 46:10 is, "Be still and know that I am God." Take a moment to reflect about who you are and who's in charge, and then bring order out of chaos.
Dr. Neilson, thanks so much. Thanks for this, and thanks for the years you've given to Baylor and the wisdom you've given to students. It's been a pleasure being a part of this and being a part of the work you're doing.